All right, so at the end of the last video, we got the code in place for some of the widgets, the inventory panel and some other ones that are yet to be built. Before we keep going with building those here, wanted to show something that I encountered when I went to build and relaunch. If you tried to launch and you got a bunch of weird errors, is probably because a lot of these UI elements in the C++ code, they need to be forward declared. And so, like, for instance, when I was looking at the item slot here, it's got a border, an image, and a text block. So if we were to comment these out, these forward declares here, when you go to build, here, I'll close the editor. When you go to build, the errors don't really make sense. This is what I'm talking about. It says stuff like, hey, you're missing a semicolon, and then unexpected token and this and that. And then it's like the generated code, the generated files, which are what the Unreal build tool uses, they have errors too. So these are a little misleading, but really what it is that it's essentially treating these classes here as something it doesn't understand. And so all you need to do is make sure that you forward declare those. So you can either do it, so I like my forward declares up here all in one place so that I can easily go and see exactly what is forward declared. But some people like to put class in front of the thing down here. That'll also work. I just think it's more messy that way. And sometimes, you can, if you don't pay attention, you could like duplicate it all over the place. So I just find it to be a lot cleaner to have it all centralized in one place right here. So now when I go ahead and launch, the errors should be gone, and we'll go back into the editor. All right, so yep, all the errors were cleared out from adding in those forward declares. So the next thing we're gonna do, like I said, we're gonna start building the missing inventory, the missing UI elements. So go into your project content folder here, and we should have the user interface folder from earlier in the course if you've been following along step by step. So in here, we created the inventory panel and the main menu, and obviously the interaction widget. But what we don't have right now is we do not have the inventory tooltip, the item slot, and the drag visual for when we go to start using the drag and drop functionality. So let's just create a couple of those. These are all just going to be basic, user widget blueprints. So let me right click and go down here, and then it's at the bottom here under user interface. So I already created one. Yep, user widget. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have WBP inventory tooltip. I'm going to have WBP inventory item slot. And then I'm going to have a item drag visual. Now we're going to start with the inventory panel because it's already in place, the basic layout. And also it's the quickest way to show you the effect of having made a C++ class that and a blueprint parented to it, and what happens when things don't match up. So remember from earlier, we made this and then just recently made it to where it can pop up on the screen, but nothing's working. Now this is parented here in the top right. You should see that it's parented to the C++ class, and if you click it, your IDE should open up right here to inventory panel. Now what I'm talking about is the bind widget meta tag. And so as I mentioned in the last video and probably one before that, this will make it to where the editor now says basically this element declared here in the C++ code is mandatory to be in the blueprint or else it will not compile. And so sure enough, if we open this up, you'll see there's a compiler error in the blueprint compiler, whatever that is. So let's click that, and you'll see you get it does doubles for some reason. I don't exactly know why, but you'll see we have an inventory panel, weight info, and capacity info that are all missing, and then it repeats that. So this is what we have to address, and this is the way that you can enforce, having it linked up to the C++ code. And then once you do create these, which all we have to do is rename, then the C++ code drives the visual part of it here. So our inventory panel is our actual wrap box is the actual inventory panel. Might be I might want to rename that, because this whole thing is inventory panel. This might be something like, I don't know, inventory pane or something. It's pretty easy to rename. You would rename it here in the C++ first, and then recompile, come back in here, and then fix it. We'll go ahead and just do it here for now. So you can either rename it here in your outliner, or you can come up here, and so we'll change it to inventory panel. For the weight, that one is weight info, and this one is capacity info. Now let's compile, and everything's good, because now it finds those matching widgets that it's looking for. So I will save. I thought that it was already. Save on compile, success. All right. So now open up the inventory item slot, because that's the next crucial piece. All right, so now this one, it's very basic. First, let me reparent it. So go to File, Reparent. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Merge. I didn't mean to click Merge. All right, Reparent Blueprint. And what we're looking for is inventory item slot. Now, again, I've talked about this before, but this is why I named the blueprints with a WBP prefix, is so that way you know which one is a blueprint and which one is C++. So this case, this one right here is the C++ class, so I'm going to reparent. Now compile. And let's see. Did I forget? It looks like I forgot to add my bind widget tag, and so that's why it worked. So let me go ahead. I'll just go over here to my where was it? My inventory panel, and just copy this whole thing. And then back under inventory item slot .h, you can add that in here on the end. It should be fine, or wherever you want. So we have an icon, a border, we have a quantity text block, and I think that's it. The border, the image, and the little quantity number. All right. Let me go ahead and look and see. Did I miss that anywhere else? Not on the tooltip. Now it's here on the item slot. What about the drag visual? Drag item visual. Okay, so that one doesn't have anything. So for the drag item visual, we can pretty much copy exactly what the item slot's going to have for right now. We're going to come back and revisit this, but basically you want the same stuff. The drag item visual is just kind of like a smaller version. That way it sticks on the mouse when you drag an item and just shows you a representation of what you're dragging. This isn't super important, but I don't want it to say inventory slot. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and close the editor and recompile that stuff. And then that way it's actually linked up in here, and you can hit the compile to check and make sure that everything's good. All right, so I'm back in the editor after that. And once again, I didn't record it, but I forgot to do the for declares again. So in drag item visual, make sure you do that. Otherwise you'll get those weird errors again on these three members you declared here. So now when I go back into my inventory item slot and hit compile, now you see it's linked up. since it has the bind widget meta tag, and now we're missing all this stuff. So for the so all this thing needs, it's going to be pretty basic. So first, what we want is we want a desired on-screen size, and we're not going to use a canvas panel because this thing is moving around on the screen. It's not meant to be attached anywhere on the screen or stationary. It's going to be moving when you like, you know, it gets added to the inventory panel. So the first thing we want is a size box. And then we will have the icon. So that's going to be an image. And then the image, we want to be able to show a border. So the border is going to be pretty thin, like almost like, see when I highlight this in the little blue line, we almost want that kind of effect, but when we want to be able to change the color of it, maybe a little bit thicker lines than that. But what you're after is the border. And so drop that. Let's see, can accept. Okay. So it says it can accept additional children. And the reason why, well, I don't know the detailed reason why, but basically size box, you can't keep putting stuff into it. What we actually need is called an overlay. And if you mouse over it, it should tell you allows widgets to be stacked on top of each other. So that's what we want. So delete your image, put an overlay in the size box, and now we're going to drop everything into the overlay. So put the image, then we can put the border, and then we want the text block, which is just called text. Oh, like that. Okay. First, we want to get this. Let's make this text a lot smaller. Obviously, this is ridiculous. Let me see here. Appearance. Where is it? Font. All right. So font. We want this to be pretty small. And it needs to be aligned to the right because I'm going to put it up here in the top right. Give it a test number of like just a 0 for now. And then what you want to do to make sure that it shows up on backgrounds is change this outline, the outline size here. And I think it's in the wrong place. Okay, yeah. So for some reason it's top to bottom is where the actual top is. So this would make the image on the bottom, border, and then the text, and that's what we want. 2 is way too much for the outline. There, that looks a lot better. And then what we want to do is actually shift this text block. Let's see. Take off the padding. Okay, that looks a little better. It needs to be up there. Maybe make it a little smaller. Okay, I think that looks good. So I made it a size of 6. Let me switch to my nicer font. Okay. Size of 6. I took off the padding. And then if you do something like, yeah, okay. I think that looks pretty good. Just testing out to make sure it looks okay with multiple numbers and stuff. We could probably tweak it a little bit more, but for right now, I'll leave it. I think, I don't know. Did it look a little bit better with the Roboto? I really don't like the Roboto font, but oops. But I feel like it kind of does. The slash across the 0 is not great for this. So you know what? Since this is just the inventory quantity stuff, I think it's fine to leave it with the default font for this. Okay, so for the border, the image is already by default filling the box. And, you know, actually, let's look at the size. So I think that the size I used in the past when I was working on this was like an 80 by 80. So for width and height override, not 80. No, okay, 80 is obviously way too big. And maybe more like a 50. And this will just be something that you have to tweak, you know, once you're once you see it go into the inventory and see how it looks on the screen, because it's kind of hard to visualize 50 pixels right now. So we'll just have to see. We've already sized the inventory panel to the screen, right? So now we need to pick up an item the first time, see this pop up, and then it'll be very easy to know, like, okay, I need to make it bigger. So it was really small before, like probably 30 pixels. So that's why the text was looking a little, I don't know, something seemed off, but this will be better because a little bit bigger font will make this look much better. Yeah, see now the outline isn't like just a solid thing in the middle, and for different numbers it's looking good. Okay. Image, we want it to be fully expanded, so you can click the fill. Border, we also want it to be fully expanded, and I think if you change brush color, all right, so there's a way, maybe your border is always a solid color, not transparent in the middle. So we might actually want to put the border on the bottom and then take the image and add a little bit of padding onto it. So like 3 pixels, that's too much. 2 pixels of padding. Okay. I guess that's okay. Let me make it 1.5 pixels. Yeah, okay. And then I don't like the text being smashed up onto it right there, so I'm gonna actually add a little bit of right padding. So there we go. So this is gonna be the inventory item slot, and this is all it is. It's just 3 things that will give us like kind of the basic representation. So what we need to do first is we need to rename these. So item border, item icon, item quantity. Compile, and it should have saved. It looks good. Okay. Now obviously I used red there just as the default to be able to easily see it. It's going to be set by our whatever we have set on the item. When it gets put into the inventory, it's going to be set to the correct color. Okay, so there's that one. And now let's do the tooltip. So for the tooltip's going to be a little more time consuming. I'm not going to record making the entire thing, but just to start off with the basics. So again, you want it to be desired on screen, just like we did with the item slot here. You want to start with a size box. And then what you want for the tooltip, because it's going to be just a bunch of different, a square with a bunch of different text. I used a vertical box, and that way I can take multiple text blocks here. So get text, and basically you can hit Control C when you're in this outliner here and just hit Control V, and it's going to paste a bunch of them. So what we're going to do is like, this is going to be like your item name and, item description, or actually item description should probably go down at the bottom. You can click these arrows here to kind of reorder stuff in the vertical box. And so then, something in here will be item quantity and so on and so forth. So what you should do is pick a good size. I think I'm going to use something like 80 width and like 100 height. And remember, these fonts are ridiculous right now. So you can actually shift click on all of these, and as long as you have similar things selected, you can now tweak the text for all of them at once. So I just changed the text down to 10. I'm going to use my custom font, which you might have gone and downloaded your own. And, tweak it until you basically get it to where things are the size you want and everything fits. So maybe I might need to make the text a little smaller. I'll try doing with an 8 and see how that goes once we get into the editor. But the part that I'm actually going to kind of skip Recording is where I go through and space all this out and, you know, change everything. Gonna make sure you put a background on the tooltip here. Whenever I get it done, I'm going to, you know, resume recording and talk about the changes I made, and that way you can easily, you know, mimic it if you want to. But yeah, just go ahead and set something up that you think looks cool, and then we can go from there. Okay, so here's what I have for right now for my tooltip. Like I said, kept it pretty basic. I just gave it like a really dark kind of green color, and in the background here, and the way, so what I did was, so I had the vertical box, and then you can right click on an element and say wrap with. So a border can have a child, so I wrapped it in a border, and the border is the dark green. So the border is only being used for a color here, and you know, we're not controlling this in code anywhere, so the border will just be a background color. You know, you can't give a background color to a vertical box since it's just for organization, so you need something back there. An image probably would have worked too, since you can set the color on an image the same way. I also, so one thing I did, and this can probably be tweaked to make it a little bit nicer. I had a max stack size number and then a text. And I think that I actually renamed some of this based from what I showed in the video where I first laid this out, because I thought it was like a little confusing. Oh yeah, I had cell value in here. I took that out because it would just be a pointless number that we can't really mess with right now. So I took that out, and I think one of these was named slightly different. I think the logic I had when I first designed this was, you have a max stack size text piece that always will say max stack size, and then you have the actual number that'll change. And that way, if it is stackable, you get both of them. Whereas, you know, if it's not stackable, then both of these are collapsed. But it kind of doesn't really make sense to have two. You could easily set the text to have the words and the number at the same time. So I'm probably going to go back and refine this. Feel free to do that on your own if you want. But it's not super necessary. Essentially what we're going to have to do here is say, okay, if it's not stackable, collapse this and collapse this. And then, you know, they'll just both be hidden, rather than having to do it on one single thing. To get it side by side, all I did was I right clicked on the stack size text and wrapped in a horizontal box. So I'm going to do the same thing for the weight. Because for the weight, see, I'd have to add it in. All right, we're gonna fix this. I'll come back later and fix this. We'll take out both of these, and then we'll make it to where the weight actually says what it's supposed to say. You know, sometimes you just got to tweak it as you go, and we don't even know how good this is gonna look size-wise on the screen, so don't worry about it right now. It's totally fine. I went. Oh, but yeah, the horizontal boxing I'm talking about is if you right click, wrap with, you can pick things from here and it'll put it inside for you. But anyway, I went through and I took all the names from the C++ class and made them match over here. But I did not reparent it. So I'm going to go File, Reparent Blueprint, find Tooltip. There it is. And then we compile. And it's already good just because I already copy pasted all the names and made them match. So now if we go to inventory item slot, remember it had a bunch of stuff that it needs to know about, like it needs to know what the tooltip is. So go to the graph, and right here you'll see the details panel for a user widget is here in the graph section and down on the left, and here they are. So here's where it wants to know what's your tooltip class. So make sure you set it to the WBP version. When dealing with the user interface elements, we want it to point to the actual blueprint with the visuals. So there's that. And then the drag item visual, we can make that one super quick. Go to, let's see, what did I call it? Item drag. So I'm rename that to where it matches. It's drag item visual. So drag item visual is literally inventory item slot, but smaller. So I think what I have here for this one is a 50 by 50. So I'm just gonna actually copy paste this whole thing, put this in drag item visual. All right, so I skipped for a second. Basically it's set to fill screen. You want to put that back to desired on screen, and everything should snap to where it needs to be. The size box, everything should snap right back to where it needs to be. It was all messed up because it still thought it was trying to fill the whole screen. But, you know, like I said, it's smaller, so put it down to something like 30 by 30 and change the item quantity text size to be like a 5, like a 6, so that it still looks good, you know, proportional. Let's see, and then take off the padding. Okay, so I gave it one padding on the top and the right so that it moved the number in a little bit. And that is our drag visual. Don't forget to reparent this one. Compile, everything's good because we copied it, the names are the same. We're not gonna be using this quite yet. We're gonna make sure the inventory itself works okay first, and then we'll worry about drag and drop stuff. All right, so we got a tooltip. We have a item slot. Now that we made the drag item visual, come back over here, drag item visual class, set that to the blueprint. All right, everything looks good. Inventory panel, go into the graph, and it needs to know the actual item slot. So change that to inventory item slot. And notice, because it's a T subclass of, you only get those two choices. So we want the blueprint version. We have that. We have everything set here in the item slot. We have the drag item visual. We have a tooltip. And in the inventory item slot, we are setting the tooltip as soon as it's created. So let's load this up and see if we pick up this bucket, if it actually works, and hopefully we won't get any crashes. So I've got my inventory open. You know, again, you can still mouse around and control things with it open. So I'm gonna aim at it, press E. Man, look at that. Oh wow, it is extremely small. Make this bigger. So yeah, so I'm on a 27-inch monitor, and this is like ridiculously small. But as you can see, it's working though. That's the important part. For one, we have, okay, so this is not working. Something's disconnected because this is not supposed to show the weight and the capacity. So we'll look at that. But we have a tooltip, and it works, and it knows to pop up when the mouse crosses the border of that item slot. It shows bucket, shows the mundane item type, it says max stack size, and then it says a plain wooden bucket. So that's all actually looking really good. It's just extremely small, and the icon itself is extremely small. So we have finally gotten to the point to where now we almost have a nice working inventory. The only thing we need is to fix the visuals here and then make it so that you can actually drag items out and drop them back into the world. And that's a pretty fully basic but fully functional inventory at that point. So let me go ahead and close this back out and go back to the editor, and I will determine the problem here and walk through that. Okay, so the bug was very simple. Basically, here in the inventory panel, when we first initialize it, we call set info text once, and that will pull in the zero out of whatever and show the maximum value and stuff. But then you need to call that same function after you add something. So inside the check to make sure we have a valid inventory and slot, after you run the for loop to add everything, then you set info text again to make sure that everything is updated. Now, one thing I noticed that kind of bugs me, I had the bucket's weight set to 4, and that's a float. And so when you go and pick it up, so see, now we're at 0 out of 50. When you pick it up, so now everything looks good, right? And then we have the print added a bucket. The thing that I don't like is that it is truncating my decimals here. I want this to, inventory weight is a float, capacity, and current weight is a float. I want this to show the decimals. I looked a little bit as to how to figure that out, and I couldn't find anything. I think the problem comes from the fact that we're generating a single string, and at some point, this returns a float, and this returns a float. But I think the conversion process from putting these into a string and then putting them into an f text, I think is where it's for some reason like doing some kind of what it considers friendly thing to make it more human readable. But really it's just frustrating because it's like, if you don't want that, now how do you control that? So I haven't figured that out quite yet. It's not a huge deal, but I would prefer that to be how it looks. But again, that's something to look at for another day. So now everything is looking pretty good. So let's go in here and tweak the sizes on these widgets. Yeah, and then to test that out, I changed the bucket's weight to like 4.5, and when you pick that up, it does say 4.5. It's just the 0.0, it's dropping. So yeah. So first we want to change the size of the item slot, and we also want to open up the tooltip. Now, if you'll notice, the tooltip, when you hover, it's got a bunch of empty space at the bottom, and I don't want that. I want it to fit, whatever the contents is, I want it to fit. So what that shows me is that, the tooltip has too much minimum size on the size box here. So its minimum height is 80. So we need to change that to something even smaller, like a 50. So that way, if it won't have all that buffer at the bottom, because now it's going to be able to get even smaller based on the content. But let's see. But overall, this whole thing needs to just come up in size. So maximum, let's just double it for right now. So let's see. Wait, what was it? Oh, geez. All right. So 240, 200. This one, make it now 160, and then make this one 100. And then for all the fonts, we definitely want that to come up. So I'm going to try 12. This one, so this one's just a number. Yeah, put that up. And then this one, and this one. And then the inventory item slot also, let's double its size. Let's see. I think I did use 80 before, because that's what I started trying to go with. 80 by 80, quantity, like do a 14. All right, compile. Let's look now and see what it looks like. Okay. It's like almost too big. The tooltip is looking way better though. Way better. And see, it's still got a little bit of a buffer at the bottom there, so I'm going to make that smaller. The item icon is feeling too big to me, and also, where's my quantity here? Something's out of order or something like that. So, because I'm supposed to, oh, you know what? No, I did that on purpose. I made it to where it won't show if it's a 1, because you don't need to print 1 on every non-stackable thing. So, max stack size is definitely, I think, yeah, that's just because here in the tooltip code, I talked about these two things. There's nothing in the actual tooltip code itself that is managing that. So those things are just always there. So let me go back to the item slot. Let's take this down. So let's do like 60. 60 by 60. Now it's almost like feeling too small. All right. So tweak it to whatever you like, to where you know it feels good with the scale of everything else on the screen. I'm feeling better about the tooltip at this point. Still needs a little bit of tweaks, and also my bucket's name needs to be capitalized. But I mean, the main point of all this is that you can see now, now you have all the different pieces that you can work with and customize to your own liking. You can see where we've gotten all of this text. You can see, where we've gotten this. You know how we're adding stuff to the inventory. We can do, let's make a couple buckets here. Man, I don't know the hotkey for play, so I got to keep doing this. One thing I wanted to mention, the characters blocking the screen. I think I've talked about this in a previous video. I'm going to add in like a little feature to where you can zoom a little. So I know this is kind of annoying the way you have to pick stuff up right now, but I will show how to fix that and refine that and make it to where you can right click to aim and get closer. So let's pick up a couple buckets now. So one thing I see right off the bat is these are slammed up against each other, so they need to have some space here. But other than that, I mean, it looks good. I want to have like at least like 1 or 2 pixels in between. But yeah, inventory is working. 12, and we have 3 items. That's capacity, and we have 12 weight because we have 3 and they weigh 4. I think that 4 is actually the weight. The max stack size text to the right of that would be the actual stack size, and that has nothing right now because it's not stackable. So I think the 4 underneath is the weight. And so, there's a lot of flavor text you need to add to make this tooltip good. Like this should say 4 pounds or whatever. And then, capitalization, mundane item. I feel like that can be taken out. That's what the border is supposed to be. A couple little things to tweak. I'm going to work on those when I resume recording. I'll, talk you through what I found. It's probably something that's not too complicated. Probably more to do with the UI than anything. And then the next feature to implement before we're done with this section is drag and drop functionality, to where we can drag the bucket out, to here to the main part of the screen, and then it'll pop up at the player's feet or wherever you want it to. All right, so I've changed quite a few things, mostly nothing that's major, but tweaked several things since the last time I was recording. And I said I was gonna figure some stuff out and talk you through what I changed. So first, let me show you what it's looking like now. So we come over here, we pick something up, and as you can see, I kind of got a good size going for the icons for right now, at least. Weight is now showing the decimal. Capacity is not, because we don't need it. The tooltip is now looking really nice. I sorted out some of the text. I sorted out the sizing of the actual widget, so that way, it can expand or contract based on the content. And I also added in the mundane, where it says mundane. That matches the color that the border is. So now both the border and the item type are just, they're going to be displayed, and they're going to show you, they're going to be color coded based on, whatever you decide the colors are for those quality types. I made the background a little bit darker here on the inventory just because it gives some nice contrast. It's subtle, but it kind of breaks it up. And yeah, it looks good. So to do all of that, and a couple more things before I leave the editor. I also went in here, my user interface, before I paused last time, I talked about how it wasn't showing the border, something was wrong with the item slot. So what I did, what it was is that a border, if you don't set anything on it, it's literally just a solid color. I also found out, well, I should have known, I just forgot. Um, in my bucket icon here is a fully transparent background. So what was happening was not that the border wasn't working really, it was that the border was a full color because in the background, it was just being set to a solid color and the bucket was transparent, so we weren't seeing a border because everything behind the bucket was the border. So what I did to solve this was if you go here to your launcher, and you don't have to do this, you can obviously, as I've said the whole time, customize it the way you want. But what I did was I stole some assets from another project. So here in my library, I have this project called the Action RPG Inventory System. It is, I believe it's free. I'm like 99% sure it's free, but I downloaded it a long time ago. You can see, it's old and it hasn't been updated, but don't worry about that. It's using like all basic default stuff, just a lot of blueprints to implement an inventory. The important thing about it though is that if you want, get this, go in and migrate out of it these textures here. They have an item border. So as you can see, it actually is transparent in the middle. So that way, it won't fill the whole thing. Even if the image is smaller, it'll only color this part when it changes color. I also got there's a slot. And as you can see, this kind of like lighter gray is going to be where the border sits. So now what I did was I changed it to where the border's on the bottom. I have a plain border on the bottom, and this could be just called like the fill color. So the fill color is just like a dark color. Then I have the border, and then the icon will sit on top of that. And as you can see, the icon is now what's highlighted green. So it's going to be slightly, it's not going to cover the actual border. And then the quantity sits on top of everything. So that's what all I changed to make that look nicer. I also copied that to the drag visual. It's just the smaller version of that same thing, which we're going to use here shortly. So again, I know that it might be a little frustrating because this is not something that you can easily replicate. I've tried to keep everything to where you can just mimic exactly what I have, but in this case, the defaults that we are given through the UMG widgets and stuff were just kind of frustrating to work with. Mainly what was driving it for me was the fact that the bucket was transparent on the background, and so I wanted to be able to account for any icon that's transparent. But this also works just fine for anything that's not transparent, right? Because the border is always going to sit on top. So even if the icon itself is, fills this entire thing, you can see how where the green is, the border still is going to be a little bit above that on the little corners there, and it's just going to nicely align. So it's just the defaults. You could make it work if you put a bunch of different borders of different sizes and stuff, but I knew that I had these and they're easily migrated from the other project, and so that's what I did. Let's see. So I changed a decent amount of stuff here in the tooltip. For one, if we look at the header, I used to have two text fields here. One was like stack size text and one was the number. So I cleaned that up, and the way I got around that was I made it to where every time you mouse over and the tooltip is created, it's going to set a string that's a combination of the word and the actual value. Same for stack size. If we are looking at a stackable item, then we're going to display max stack size and then show the number. And the arguments here, the functions being used here, the from int will obviously just make a string version of whatever integer. This one, sanitize float, what it does is by default, it will, so you can see there when we mouse over it, it will strip trailing zeros and allow you to control the amount of fractional digits. So the reason why I wanted to use this, I mentioned it briefly earlier in the video, is that I was annoyed by not being able to have any control over my values here. So I wanted, I wanted the float values on the weight, but I didn't want it on the capacity, and I wanted to be able to show that there's a decimal. So I found that when I was looking through the different, functions for the floats, really where this comes into play is here in the item, not in the item slot, in the inventory panel. So I did the same thing. So you remember earlier we had set info text. Well, set info text was using ftext from string, and then I was passing in something like a string that was like this, and it was taking in the two different arguments, the weight and the weight capacity. And there may be a way to do it, but I was not able to find it to be able to control the float format while doing that. So I did the same thing in here. I replaced the way it was doing it before with now a const string that is created every time set info text is called, that is built from the weight, a slash, and the weight capacity, and both of those are passed through sanitize float, while the capacity is put through from int. And so creating these strings is not too computationally intense, and it's only going to be happening, mousing over through the inventory. And so it kind of bugs me a little bit to have to make strings every time like that, but for the sake of the UI and being able to control it and keep it formatted the way you want, I thought it was a good trade-off here. So let's see, what else did I do? I renamed in the inventory panel itself. In the inventory panel itself, first off, I increased the size a little bit, so now it's just a square, 600 by 600. I also changed this to where now we're always gonna, this will be, in my mind, for what I'm making here, this would always be constantly displayed at the bottom. We would always show weight, we would always show capacity. So I split these apart. Before it was just numbers, and now it says weight and capacity, and now these numbers here are the ones that are being set in the C++ code. I also took the wrap box itself and renamed it, so it's called inventory wrap box now rather than inventory panel. I thought, it was a little bit awkward that the widget's called inventory panel, and then you had inventory panel, and even in here in the code it was referring to inventory panel. So I just went in here under the header and I renamed it to inventory wrap box and just had to change it in one or two spots. I don't know why it's not coloring this piece of text, but you can see there, inventory wrap box. So like I said, not anything that's a crazy change. It's all very quick, but it was just little tweaks. As I was looking at stuff, I started finding things. The colors. So the colors, when I'm showing you, the color and the borders being set here. So let me load it up really quick with the other color. So if I take the bucket and change it to like a different quality, now you'll see it's got that nice orange border, and then when you mouse over it, it's got orange coloring on the text. So obviously it doesn't match. We're not going to leave it at that. But the thing is that I had a little bit of a challenge. I got kind of frustrated with it. Basically, before, what I was doing was I was setting values here in these linear colors that I thought, were an RGB from 0 to 255. But I had never realized this entire time working with these that these linear colors are in what's called, I guess it's referred to as sRGB space. but it goes from 0 to 1. So my colors were all wrong. My orange color was not working, and I think I had like a blue one. None of those were working. And the reason was because if you put a value in greater than 1, it gets capped at 1. And what I had was, for orange, it was just solid yellow because red and green were being capped at 1, and then blue was at 0. And I'm pretty sure, when you mix red and green, you get yellow. So I had to go and hunt down the proper, conversions, look at those numbers again for those colors and convert it. And so one easy, quick way I saw to do that, there's a website here called Online Color Converter, and it's off of some guy's GitHub. But the thing about it was, you can sit here and choose a color. So like if we do on an orange, and right here is what I'm talking about, sRGB from 0 to 1. It puts the 3 values in a, separated by comma, and you can easily go in here and like paste it in. So they have a 0.5 for the green on their orange. I decided to do a little bit darker in the end, and so yeah, it's just one thing that even if you go and look at the class, it's not very apparent because these are floats, and it doesn't really tell you anywhere I saw that it's from 0 to 1. It doesn't explicitly say that. Now it does talk all about the different spaces and this and that, but I'm not super familiar with sRGB versus HSV versus linear and so on and so forth. And so it was just something I just learned just now, and wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. So if you are using set brush color in your UI, it's always from 0 to 1. So the other changes I made for the tooltip, basically the way the tooltip works is it's a size box, right? Now, before I had a max desired width and height checked, and you can see there it was set to 200 and 240. I remember that when we did the interaction widget here, it's attached to a canvas panel, right? Because we always want it in the same place on the screen. And if you click on the size box here, it's got size to content. And that was what we had to use to make this one grow or shrink based on what it contains. But for some reason, the size box that's just by itself, it doesn't have that. But I think what's going on is that when you don't have a max desired height and width, it will just grow on its own based on the widgets that it contains. So in this case, the text blocks. And the other thing about that is, when I realized that was happening, the item description, right, it could be long. It could be a couple lines, a couple short sentences. Down here, there's a wrapping feature. So if I uncheck this real quick and show you what's happening, pick up the bucket, and now look at what's going on. Well, okay, it's making a liar out of me. Earlier, I had that set. I did not have that set, and the item description was flowing way off the right of the screen. Maybe it's because of this. You know what? Okay, so these two are independent of each other. So if I put this back to 0, it's going to be disabled. And now when I pick it up, yeah, see, so in this case, it's actually because I don't have those max values checked. Let me do it one more time. So I had it set to the size box with the max desired width and height. And see, this is what I'm talking about. So this is what I originally had. And I was like, hey, this is obviously unacceptable. And so what I did was found that wrapping section, uncheck your max width and height. And then down here for the item description text, since I knew that I had my previous width value set at 200 anyway, then I told it to go ahead and auto wrap or do the wrapping at 200. And that way the widget itself expands to fit that, but then obviously it wraps at that, and then the widget, since there's no max width, will still expand to fit it nicely. And so I think it's looking pretty good. I made capitalize the name of the bucket, gave a little bit of space in between things, increased the fonts on most of them. And so, yeah, it's all about, like I said, it's just tweaking it to where it gets to where you like the way it looks. So those are all the things that I did. I talked about the important from the other project if you want to do that. Otherwise, just tweak it enough with the existing, widget features here until you get it to where you like the way things look. And the next thing we're going to focus on now is we're going to add the drag and drop functionality, where we can, once we have one of these things picked up, we will be able to drag it off the inventory and let go here in the open space, and it will pop back into the world. So for that, we can go ahead and close the editor, because we're going to need to change a couple things in C++. Namely, we need a drop item function on the character, right? Because that doesn't exist. So it's going to be a public function because other classes need to call it. In this case, it needs to be accessed from our main menu. So if you remember, I left a placeholder here, and it basically said, get the owning player pawn, so we have a reference. Now what we want is when it detects a drop on the main menu, which is covering all the, what we perceive as empty space on the screen, it will then cast to the correct stuff, get the player reference, and then call drop item with that, whatever item comes in on that drag and drop operation. So let's go in here to our public functions on our character, and we're going to add drop item. It takes in a uItem base pointer, and that is item to drop. It also takes in a quantity to drop. Give it an implementation, and I'm going to move it down underneath toggle menu. Okay. So what do we need to do in drop item? Well, first we need to see if we can find the matching item that's coming in. I'm actually gonna do, let me think. Do we need to safety check against the inventory? Could inventory ever be null? I would say no, only because we are creating a default subobject of inventory on the player. Every time the player is constructed, this constructor will run. So it's going to be, something is definitely severely wrong with your game if that fails and you're still able to get to this point during play. So I would say we are safe not doing a, if player inventory and then putting everything else in that. What we are going to do is we're going to call find matching item on item to drop. So basically now all this is saying is like, this is a safety check just on the item. Like, okay, you're dragging something in and it detects the drop, but now let's just do a quick check to make sure everything is valid there. What we're going to need now is we're going to need f actor spawn parameters and call that spawn param. So this is a struct containing different things you can set for spawning a new actor into the world. So our first we're going to set owner, and that's this because it's coming out of the character. We're going to set be no fail to true. And I think what this is, I think this is like saying like if the space the item is trying to spawn is occupied, will it just cancel? And we will say we don't want that. So not the same. Okay. So this is, it's not the case, but basically we want to set that just because we want it to continue, because I guess these conditions in here are not something that we want to stop it. And then you want to call, there's a so spawn params dot spawn collision handling override. This is the one I was really just trying to talk about. It uses an enum, and what we're setting is espawn actor collision handling method. And we want to use adjust if possible, but always spawn. So right, so like I said, this is the one where like, say you're trying to drop something right next to a wall, and the point where the item would spawn would be inside the wall. It will kind of move it back for you, rather than, you know, just failing or something like that. So now we need a spawn location. So we're going to make an F vector, call it spawn location, and it's going to be get actor location. And then what I did was I decided to make it drop very slightly forward. So it kind of looks like, you know, you could add, it comes out slightly forward of the character, looking like he kind of threw it down. And this would be something you would want to do if, say, you had an animation that was like, you know, he grabs something out of his pouch and kind of tosses it. This would be something you would do for that. So get actor forward vector times 50. And so all this does is it gets the forward vector and just moves 50 units forward, which is very short. It's not a lot at all, but it's just enough to make it kind of, like I said, look good with how it spawns rather than spawning in the inside of your character. Now we're going to make a what's called an F transform, and so this is like location, rotation, and size all packed into one struct. Call it spawn transform, and I'm passing in get actor rotation and then spawn location. And so I think what's going on with these guys is you don't have to have all of it. You only have to have, I think it'll like use the default size if you don't pass in a size. I know that transform is those three things, but in this case we're only passing in rotation and location. I think there's a third constructor that will let you pass in size. Yeah, see, rotation, translation, and scale. That's what I'm trying to say. Rotation, translation, and scale. That is what constitutes an F transform. All right, so now we've got where it's spawning and how it's spawning, you know, how its orientation will be. So now we're going to set a few things specific to our inventory system and stuff. So you want to make an int32, call this removed quantity. And what we're going to do is we're going to call remove amount of item, pass in item to drop, and pass in quantity to drop. All right, so now we've got removed quantity. So now we're actually going to spawn a new pickup actor. So we're going to call it pickup, and we've not done anything in the character class with a pickup up to this point. So I'm going to tell writer to add my include. And go up here. So this is part of my game include, so I'm going to separate that back, put that back where it needs to be. Going back down to drop, we're going to call get world spawn actor. This takes in a template, and obviously it's going to be an A pickup. And what we're passing in is the pickup static class, the spawn transform, and the spawn params. So I talked about when you make a UI element, you don't use static class. We're doing this purely through C++. We're constructing a C++ object first, and then remember when a pickup gets initialized, it sets everything it finds from the data table. It sets the the asset and all of its text data stuff for the interaction. It sets all of that all in the C++ class. So calling the static class here is a good way to do this. Once the pickup is spawned, immediately what we're going to do is we're going to call pickup initialize drop, because we've got both. Remember, we've got drop and pickup. But because there's no possible way for the item data table to be valid on this pickup that's being created, we set that through the blueprint. There may be some complicated way to set that right here, but I don't know how, and I just found the using the two different functions to be the easiest way. I know I talked about that when I was showing how to write the pickup class. So that's something I'll probably look into, but for now, that's why we're calling initialize drop, because in this case, anything dropped will need to go through that, since there's no way right now to set the item data table in this pickup that we're creating right here. So all we do for initialize drop is we pass in the type of item again, and we pass in removed quantity, because that's how many was removed out of the inventory. And that could be it could be, rather than dropping the entire thing, it could be part of a stack we drop, right? And so that's why we want to know a quantity for remove amount, and we want to use that here rather than just drop the whole thing. And that's it. That's all we need for drop. We've already, since we've got pickup already, we've got inventory already, everything's already here and in place. And you just have to set up those spawn parameters and create it and then call that. So pretty easy. I did add myself a little log here. What is it? Player in a find matching item will return. So this is technically returning a U item and doing an if check to see if it's null or not. So I'm going to say item to drop was somehow null. Should never happen, but just in case, you want to be able to trace that easier. All right, so now we can drop something off of our player. So now we actually need to use that. And now I'm going to go back to main menu, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. And now we can start doing our the casting and stuff. So we're going to create first we need to include our item drag drop operation. So under inventory, what did I call it? It's under user interface, inventory, item drag drop operation. So we're going to create one of those. Called item drag drop, and it is equal to cast to a U item drag drop operation of, oh man, I didn't mean to hit that, the incoming operation. Once that's created, then we're just going to do a check and say if player character and item drag drop. Oh, okay, it looks like, did I not? Okay. So something else we got to do. I didn't fill any of this out yet either. But thankfully, it's very quick and pretty easy. So all we're going to need is two fields here in the header, and we don't need to touch the CBP at all. One of them is UItem base, a source item, and the other one is a uInventory component source inventory. Put my forward declares here. It already did one of them for me. So there. And that's all we needed. Now come back over here to main menu. Now we can say why is it mad? Oh, well, no, I have the header now. Oh yeah. Classes are private by default if you don't add a specifier. So forgot that. Okay, so now what we need is we need to okay. So we're doing an if check. If player character and the item drag drop source item are both valid, then we're going to say player character drop item, and we're going to pass in item drag drop source item and item drag drop source item quantity. Oh, and I get rid of that. That's why everything was grayed out for me, because it's saying like, hey, you can't reach this code you're going to return beforehand. So that is it. That's pretty simple. Return a true, otherwise return a false. Everything up here still looks good. Yeah, so that's it. Okay, so there's that. The last thing we need to do is now, how do we actually pick up the item? So now we can drop it from the character. We can drop it on the main menu, which is the empty space of the screen, but we don't, how do we pick it up? That's all done here in the item slot. So the item slot already knows when the mouse is over it, you know, because it's using the tooltip functionality. So that's why we overrode these functions here, mouse button down and mouse leave and all this stuff. So mouse leave, we're not going to use this one right now, and we're not going to use this one either. We just implemented all this for future use. These two are really for, I added like I'm gonna show how to build a little right click submenu. So that's what these guys are for. The one that we care about right now is drag detected, because that's the one that's going to make it to where you can go over the item and click and hold and start moving the mouse, and it will realize what you're doing and then pick it up, cause it to spawn the drag visual and attach to the mouse and all that stuff. So right off the bat, what we need is we want to make sure that our drag item visual class is valid, because otherwise, once you start going through this code, you're going to get a crash. Why is it mad? Oh, I need the include for drag item visual. So let's see. Let me rearrange some of these a little bit. User interface, inventory, drag item visual. So if drag item visual is valid, we're going to create one. You call create widget just like we had before. It's obviously of type, drag item visual. Now the first argument is the owner, so it's coming off of this item slot, so we want that, and then we're going to use the drag item visual class as the spawning class. Now this is where it gets a little bit, it's pretty straightforward, right? Because you know that it needs to be essentially a miniature version of the item slot icon, the item slot itself. So we're going to set item. I think I might have done the same thing where I didn't. Yep, everything's protected here. These need to be public because they're going to be set from the other class. So where was I? Item slot. So now item icon is equal to, oh, it's not equal, we're going to call set brush from texture. And what you're getting for that is your item reference that the item slot has, asset data, icon. You then are going to set the border of the drag visual and simply set the border, set the color, whatever our current brush color is on our current border. We just use that with get brush color, so that's really convenient. And then the last thing obviously is the quantity. And call it set text ftext as number, and I'm going to use item reference quantity. All right, so that's it for the visual portion. Oh yeah, it can be made const since it's only being set here, being created, and then set some stuff. Now we need the actual drag drop operation. Yep, so I need the include for that as well. And I'm going to call this one drag item operation. This one now is an object, because remember, this is the data side of it. This is what, allows it to, once you take this somewhere and drop it, this is what allows it to carry different, other data pieces, not just UI elements. So we're calling new object because this is just a new object created in memory. So I'm going to create, it's just created just like this. We don't need to call there's no constructor, right? Because remember, we just have two fields in the header. So you're just creating a new one, and then we're just going to set those fields. So source item is equal to item reference for this item slot, and source inventory is equal to item reference owning inventory. Right, so now it's all making sense why we created all these fields, right? The other thing that I like to do, so you can set, oh yeah, well obviously you have to tell the drag item operation what visual it's using. So that one is our drag visual we just made. So I had to stop for a second there and look at something. I think this is a change in the new versions of Unreal Engine. Since they introduced they use the T object pointer, it's more widespread now. See here, it's all angry because it's like saying, hey, this T object pointer of a U widget and your drag item visual pointer, they don't match. So all I had to do to fix that was come up here and change this to a T object pointer and give it the template type, and now everything's happy again. So I'm not quite sure why that is. I mean, obviously what you can tell from that is that I wrote this code originally before I updated to Unreal Engine, what am I on, 5.1. But yeah, sometimes you encounter stuff like that, but thankfully it was a very quick fix. So now that we've set the visual component, the last thing we're going to set is the pivot. And what this is this is going to tell it where is it attaching to the mouse. And so what I liked was top left. As you can see, there's quite a few different values here. Mouse down is another good one, because that way just wherever you click, it'll just stick right on the pointer. Top left, even if you kind of start the drag from the bottom right of the icon, you will see it snap to the top left. The top left of it will snap to the pointer. So I liked it because then it makes it, it shows that you're carrying it on the mouse, but you still have the mouse pointer itself free because it's the top left and there's nothing kind of obscuring it. That's what made sense to me. So as you can see here, drag detected has an output argument. It's by reference. out operation. So all we need to do is we need to set out operation is equal to our drag item operation. And now this way, right, out operation, now it knows what that is. And then when you're over here, in operation on this native on drop is that same kind of format. And this is why we can cast it, get a successful cast here, and you know, perform our action. Now I said the wrong thing. I said we're not going to use these other functions, but we are. This one doesn't handle the actual mouse click itself. This only handles when it notices the mouse is dragging. We do need native on mouse button down in order to detect that we are left clicking and we are dragging. Okay. So first, what we need, get rid of this return, because now we're gonna return our own things. It returns an f reply. Okay, so create one and call it reply, and this one is equal to super, basically this. So this is the default stuff, right? So whatever comes in on these two events, we will create that. But now what we're gonna do, we're gonna make modifications to that return. So what we want is we want if our in mouse event dot get affecting button is equal to e keys left mouse button. We're going to return for our reply dot handled dot detect drag, and for detect drag we're going to pass in take widget, it's a function, and then e keys left mouse button. So detect drag, yeah, so the first param is detect dragging in this widget. So take widget just returns you kind of a reference of the underlying widget. So we're telling it detect drag if you're pressing left mouse button, but we only want to do any of this if this mouse event coming in sees it's the left mouse button as well. Now, if we don't detect a left mouse button down and we don't, and a drag, because you can click and hold the left mouse button and not move it, and this won't fire, right? Because there's some threshold deep down in the engine that I have no idea how to find for either an acceleration or some kind of movement amount to where it will say, okay, now a drag is detected. But if you don't move it, you'll see, we'll test it. It doesn't detect. But if we click any other mouse button, then all we want to do is just return reply.unhandled. And so this will make it, to where obviously nothing happens. Yeah. We're going to later on, when we add in the ability to right click and create that little submenu I talked about, that will be another section of code in here. But for right now, it's going to be blank. So I'll just, submenu on right click will happen here. All right, so everything should be in place. Now we have the ability to detect a mouse button down on the item slot. We have the ability to now perform these actions once it detects a drag. Then we will have the item data and the visual on our mouse pointer, and we can take it over here to the main menu and we can drop it. As long as the drop casts correctly to our drag drop, which it will, then we make sure we can access our player and our item, and we call drop item, and it should remove it from our inventory and spawn it back into the world. So let's go ahead and launch the editor and try this out. So I got some compiler errors, and the main reason was just because uitem base, it doesn't know that in the player character. So just go up here, got to add a forward declare and try it again. So again, I got even more compiler errors on that. This time they were linker errors. So if you're not familiar with what a linker is, that's the thing that actually goes and tries to build, when it's building your executable, it needs to pull in the actual code from things and put it into what's going to be the executable under the hood. And so it was mad because here in my inventory item slot, it's like, hey, all this stuff that you've filled out, all these different user interface operations, it didn't know how to find the code for that, like the detect drag and all this stuff underneath. So what you have to do, come to your project down, it should be like down on the top level. So you have your private and public for your code, and you have all these files. So there's some C# files here. We want the build.cs. Go ahead and open this and you'll find this list here. This is how Unreal Engine includes different, they call it modules, but if you're familiar with C++, libraries, which is also a common thing referred to in Linux lots of times, like writing code in Linux. This is like libraries, and so what you want to do is go ahead, I don't care about head-mounted display, add Slate Core, Slate, and UMG. I think Slate Core is really the only one we need, but this will cover everything, and that way, any future UI work, you have these available, and you won't hit linker errors when it tries to use functions and build your game from these different modules. So hopefully now it will finally compile and launch, and we can test our stuff. All right, so everything compiled that time. Now let's go ahead and give this a shot. So if it worked correctly, first of all, you will see that we can click and drag. All right, so that looks good. And see, look, it shows the quantity this time because I didn't make it, the drag item visual doesn't care, if it's stackable or not. It's showing us the quantity. But I think that's okay because that way you've got one. We could easily take that off and put in a little, if check for non-stackable. I probably will do that just to make it consistent. So now if we drop this onto the game space, there you go, look at that. It worked. Interaction widget's good on the new pickup. We hit E, we get it back. Now this is the other big thing, watch your math down here. This, I had to do lots of debugging and probably still will catch a few things when we do stackable items, but you want to always make sure that dropping and picking up things, the math constantly stays correct. So we're good. 2 items, 8 because they weigh 4 each. And then this is what I was talking about. See, when you drop it, it drops right in front of the player a little bit. Oh, the camera blocked was blocked by the bucket. But you can see that it drops a little bit in front. And then physics, since we have physics enabled on these, they fall down, and it just, the guy is not moving, obviously, because I'm not doing anything with animations, but you could easily see how if you had a little animation to kind of have his arm going up or something, it'd look pretty good. It'd look fine. It just kind of drops like that. So everything is at a really good spot right now. We got the inventory fully working. We got tooltips. We got information. We can drag and drop. And see, when you drop it onto the player inventory, it knows, oh, okay. So there will be some stuff I need to put to do. So basically what's happening here is I thought I was wrong. I started to say it'll know you're dropping on this rather than main menu. The reason why this didn't work and why I could still drop the item right on the inventory and it detects a drop is because you have to tell it how to handle those operations. And since this inventory panel has no code whatsoever for handling a drop operation, the drop operation just falls through. And it goes back in the hierarchy to finding the first widget that does handle it, and that's the main menu. And so you can still drop through your inventory. But what I want to be able to do is I only want to be able to drop if I drop on empty space, right? Because if you add in like an equipment panel, or maybe you make it to where you add in multiple pages so you can click left and right and go and see like a quest log or something, right? I want all of those things to be counted as valid on the screen if they need to be. And in this case, this one does, because you don't want to, I don't know. I guess it doesn't really hurt anything. I just kind of view it as sloppy. Like I feel like you wouldn't see this in a real game, like in a AAA game or something. Probably not. So there's a way I have that. I know that I did this, when I made this all the first time, and so I'll figure that out and come back and talk about that in the next video. So we're actually getting kind of close to the end of all this. It's been a journey. What's left now is to do a little bit of refinement, make it to where, you can, I wanted to show how to make a little aimer. When you right click, you kind of zoom in so it's easier to pick stuff up, and then just keep expanding. So after that, you would want to make the sub menu to split. You would want to have container functionality where you can go and open a chest or something. So the next thing we're going to do, the next major thing before all that stuff, actually, we're going to do handling stackable items. So that'll be a whole video of its own. We'll do that next, and then after that, we'll just keep expanding on the existing stuff we have.